Open. Yeah, let me open. Okay, we're good. Thanks. Okay, and you'll be around in case from 4:30 on in case I need something? Okay, hopefully we won't. Okay, terrific. Okay, bye-bye.
It's very good to be here again, and to be surrounded by all your lovely presences.
Thank
And
you.
we have an intriguing and not simple subject for the year. The question of the religious imagination in terms of reading Torah, learning Torah. And if you looked at what I wrote about this in the description, I divided this up into two parts. That's an attempt to be systematic. That is, imagination. Do you need imagination to read Torah? Is that actually a quality? I never heard it mentioned in any of the lists of qualities that you have to be a good learner of Torah. And I have noticed that whenever I use the word imagination while I'm teaching, there are usually some people in class who kind of go like that, as if that's a strange word to use of such things, to use about Torah. The second application that I suggested is just, do we imagine that the characters in the Torah had an imagination? In other words, do we imagine that that was important for them? That what they imagined was part of the story, rather than simply what they said, what they heard, what they saw, what they did. No? These are the verbs that are used. And therefore, it leads us to a seems to me, somewhat bourgeois, somewhat unimaginative view of what Torah is all about. And so what I want to do today, very, very well aware of my proclivity for spending too much time at the beginning and then having no time for the ending, I want to start before we get to Lech Lecha, which is our parsha, and which is going to be our first launch out into the sea of imagination and the Torah. Our first test flight, to change to see what we can make of it, of that theme in terms of the Lech Lecha story. Before I launch, I want to just say something about the actual creation of the human being, the original creation. One of the parshiot, of course, the first parsha of the Torah, Parshat Bereshit, in which the human project is launched, really. That's the beginning of the human project, where God says, yes, let's read it, famous pasuk, Perik Aleph, pasuk Chavlav, 126, Vayomer Elokim, Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmutenu. Let us make man, the human project. Now, God is now here projecting, and I say a project, he's projecting now a creature who is going to be b'tzalmeinu kidmutenu, in our image and in our form. What's the difference between Selim and Demut? I'm not going to go into that. It's probably interesting, but that's not where I am now. Just the very idea that the first thing God says, let us make Adam. And you don't know what Adam is either yet. We don't, if you're reading the Torah for the first time, what's Adam? Could be from Adamah. Chazal speculate, sages speculate. It could be the man who was made from earth, the material man. Or it could be, on the other hand, playing with words, Adamel Elokim. I am like God. I resemble God. In other words, there is the tension of two very different understandings of man. as body and a soul, if you will, that way of looking at it, with a lot of tension between the two. Or you could say simply, we don't know. At this point, we don't know what he's going to be like. But there's a project here called Adam, and the one thing we're told about it is he's going to be like us. And that leads to a lot of discussion, very, very famous classical discussion in Rashi and from the Midrash. Why the plural, for heaven's sake? Literally, for heaven's sake. Why the plural? It opens the text up to heretics. A heretic, is someone who's on the lookout for something spicy to get out of the Torah, would say, you see, God didn't create by himself. The angels created with him. It was a cooperative project, and such things. So why did God take the risk of opening the text up to heretics? Seems, in a way, excuse the expression, irresponsible, right? It's taking a risk. Why use the plural? Why not just I shall make? And in fact, it's God alone who makes in the end. So, but why go there? And the answer that's given there in Rashi is to teach you anvatanuto shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Anvatanut is the complex form of anava. To teach you something about, let's say, the humility, there's a word that I'm trying to, the lack of ostentatiousness of God. That God isn't going to push himself forward because he has a complex situation to deal with in the heavens. In fact, he's rather like us. He has a social situation there. He has all those angels. And even though he is in control of the angels, and he is the one who does everything, and the angels have a rather mysterious auxiliary role somehow, yeah, the fact is that they might feel bad if I don't consult them. And that's what a person should always do. Consult those who are less than him if there is a prospect of making it in some way a good social atmosphere, right? That there should be. It becomes more interesting than that in this, what I would call exercise in the ethical imagination, right? Not the religious imagination, but the ethical imagination, how to behave. The Torah teaches you how to behave, musar, ethically, morally. Yeah. So it becomes more interesting that the angels might be jealous in some way. How might they be jealous? It slips my mind the logic of it for the moment. One of the things that's said is that God explains to them why we need to do this, because man, if we make him only in my image, then the tachtonim, the lower worlds, will be jealous. Again, there's a question of jealousy somewhere. Now, I won't go into the details of this, especially as for the moment it slipped my mind. But the point is that God is willing to use extremely anthropomorphic language, the naaseh, the plural there, in order to allay the anxieties, the jealousies, the envies of some hypothetical group around him, the group of angels. All this, why? Not to tell you the fact of the matter, but to somewhere ask you to use your imagination, your ethical imagination, just as I have an eye, excuse me, just as I am aware of possible bad feeling, that I might be creating bad feeling around me. It's almost ridiculous to say it like that. But the real point is, you should have sufficient imagination to think of what might be implicit in the world you live in, and to try to prevent bad blood in one way or another. That is ethics. And in order to act ethically, in a way, you're going to have to imagine ethically and realistically. So if we think just of an ethical imagination, then that's certainly an important lesson one can learn. And there I would have no hesitation in saying that the Torah is about the ethical imagination. We still haven't got to the religious imagination, however, because that's not the end of the story. what does he mean when he says, let's make him after our form and in our image, but B'Tselem, Elohim, Salmenu v'Kidmutenu, in the plural, as we've seen. What does God mean? So again, commentaries say things like this. Well, of course, that's impossible. Yeah, there's no way of making an imitation of God, that man is not in any meaningful way a replica of God. What are you talking about? And what happens then is that there has to be a solution to this original theological problem. So one classic suggestion is, no, it's not God that we are an imitation of, but midotav, his ways of behaving in the world, which is similar to what we've just seen. We see how he behaves with his social inferiors, let's say. We've seen how he behaves, and we therefore apply it to ourselves, and right. So we're talking here not about imitating God, but imitating God's ways. The various midot of God. Mahu rachum afatarachum. Gemara in Shabbat famously says, just as he is compassionate, so you be compassionate. Now, the compassion of God could be on a very different scale and of a very different quality from the human compassion. But there's enough there, when you talk about behaviors, there's enough there to work. You know, we can say, oh yeah, that works. If I don't think about being really like God. But nevertheless, God says, B'Tselmenu Kidmutenu, which is a double way of saying, really like us, somehow in the image of us. And what we find, what we find immediately after that, almost immediately in the next verse, Chaf Zayin, and so God then created the human being, B'Tselmo, so exactly as he had said, but now in the singular, to know how it really happened. God created the human being in his image, right? We got that cleared out. Yes, and what in fact happened. But what happened in God's project was something different. The project itself contained imaginative elements. Do you see what I'm trying to say? The project meaning God's mind, if we can use such an expression. When God says, let us do something, that's God thinking. That's God intending, God speaking, right? It's a social situation. It's a humanoid situation. And when God was being in that mode, then we did have the expression B'Tselmenu Kidmutenu. And now, in fact, he creates a B'Tselmo, B'Tselem Elokim Bara'oto. And here Rashi introduces a complication. He says, God created man in his image. He says, not in God's image. In the human image, in the image that was right for man, right? B'tfus, the unique image of what a human being is supposed to be. And we don't know anything about it, but except that immediately after that, it says, B'Tselmo, B'Tselem Elokim, which is as much as to say, and Rashi actually says it, that the human image is the same as the divine image. God has created the human being in a distinctly human way. Don't yet know for sure what that means, but it's an image that was prepared for him. Rashi uses the imagery of someone who is making coins, is preparing the stamp, is preparing the mold for the coin, and then uses the coin, and then the coin changes to many different varieties. It's not only one image, but it turns out to be the images of all human beings in the world. And there is space for variety and otherness and, infinite otherness. Although, in a way, it's just an imitation. This is what man was meant to be. Starts off with one, which becomes many. And then in the end, we're told, after that purely human description, that was the same as the image of God. So we come around but again to the same thing, an insistence that the human image, properly speaking, is like God. Mahu afata, not just the behavior of God, perhaps, but something else. What was peculiar to the human image? What was peculiar that was prepared for this project? Rashi says, and it's really quite extraordinary, I've never noticed it quite so clearly. He says the fact that man was made with hands, with God's hands, and not with God's words. Everything else in the world, are you with me on this? This is very exciting. Everything else in the world was made by God's word. Yeah. Vayomer Elokim Yehi, or let there be. And there was. God said, and it was. When it comes to the human being, there's no Yehi Adam. Let there be man. Instead, God starts working. In some way, it's handwork. And that's what I want to focus on before we move on to Abraham. That in some way, God has his hands on it. And Rashi quotes from a couple of places, for instance, in the Torah, where that point is made, really. At the beginning of chapter 2 of Bereshit, we read, Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et ha'adam mi'afar ha'adamah. That God formed the human being from the dust of the earth, mixed with the rainfall, the water that had just fallen for the first time, the first rainfall had come down. Before there was water, there couldn't be man. Again, everything leads on to everything else, so I have to control myself here. There's a tempting side path there, but I'm not going there. But just say the image of someone who works in clay, la pâte, yeah, pasty stuff. All right, you have dust. You can't form anything out of dust. And there's no rain, so there has to be rain. Adam ayin, the Torah says there can be no man. There can be no Adam, let's not say man. No, this thing that we don't know anything about yet. There can be no Adam. Why? There's no water. And you need water and earth. You need water and dust. You need water and flour. Like this baker, Rashi says. Kagaval zeh. How humanoid can you get? Like this baker, on the words Vayitzar Hashem Elokim et Adam, that God formed. He got his hands in there and he started kneading the dough. That's what Rashi says. Lash et ha'isa, which it means to knead the dough, right? He's preparing a challah. And Adam is the first challah in the world. That's not me. That's Midrash. I'm not sure it's in Rashi. I think it is in Rashi. I know, not quite in that form. No, but there is that source. So that's what the human is. He's the first product of a human, the process of working stuff, working material, biyadayim, as nothing else is. God will use many words to Adam once. Isn't it interesting that Rashi pays so much attention when he wants to say what's peculiar about the creation of the human being, tvus shalo, what went into his unique making. And he doesn't say the obvious and spiritual thing, that God breathed his breath into him, which is the next stage. After he's created man, then he breathes into him. Now that's a nice, spiritual, satisfying image, if you want. That's not what Rashi says. What was unique to the human being is that God had his hands in him, in the creation of him, with that very earthy and the vegetal process in which things come alive. So you mix things together. And here I'm thinking of great French philosopher who worked largely with imagery and the imagination, trying to understand the range of the imagination, what the imagination can do. The imagination works. One of his great images for this is precisely like that, like clay that needs the water, right? The dust needs the water, the flour needs the water, and that helps you. You can pluck knobs of clay out and say, no, that's too much. You can combine. You constantly keep combining the water, and that allows the moisture, the stickiness, allows you. That's human stuff. Now think of it in a tactile way. And other experiences we have of our hands getting into sticky stuff. You know, I won't go into detail, but you can use your own imaginations, that there is something ultra-human about this. And this is how a human creator works. Of course, there are other forms of creative activity, like making a pestle. You chip away at the marble till you've got your statue. But that's not the way God made him. God made us, God made us through a process of this kind. The French philosopher I was talking about is called Gaston Bachelard, Bachelard, and he says something like this. And we have to move on to Lech Lecha very, very quickly. So what does he say? He says imagination doesn't have to do with images. It doesn't form images. On the contrary, it deforms images. But what the imagination does, what the hands do in the dough, is constantly rework. That urge to get your hands into material, he calls it the material imagination. And he thinks very highly of it. You know, he doesn't think of materialism in a crass sense. He says, this is getting right down to the roots of life. You get your hands inside something and you create it from the inside. And what you're mostly doing is moving on constantly from one possible shape to another possible shape. And you have a certain enjoyment, almost a ruthless enjoyment, in not resting content with the first thing that begins to make any sense, but just to keep on exploring inside the dough. Let's see what else emerges. And so he will have he says this image for the imagination has about it a pliability and a sensuality. Think of the word sensual. It's not pretty. It's not like painting a pretty flower. No, I'm going to copy. Oh, I like the way that looks. I'm going to make one now as a picture. On that's the surface of things. Instead, the divine creation ignores the surface, ignores the form, and gets right inside the actual material and works it until eventually, let's call that Adam. Then finally there is some art, but in a way, it could have gone on. The process could have gone on. And that's the nature of the forming imagination of human beings. That when someone is really creating something, he's usually working with two different things at the same time. There's an ambiguity. There's a sense of, I'm interested in love. All right, and I'm going to write about love. But immediately then there will arise, what could be against love? There is hate. Do love and hate have anything to do with each other? Do they speak to each other? In other words, immediately when I want to give life to the idea of love or of any abstraction, I put it into intimate connection with its opposite, right? You can't make a baby from a male and you can't make a baby from a female, I mean, in a way. But you put the two in connection and it's sticky stuff. You know, it's, who knows? And that's the way the great former creates things. And this is the way he wants human beings to be created. And I now want to add just one more point here, which is where I've been going. He says, Bachelard says, a stable and completed image clips the wings of imagination. Once you have a nice set image, then you don't have to imagine it any further. It's set. And it certainly can't have any imagination. God created a human being with the addition of water to the dry stuff so that Adam would be capable, God would be capable of continuing to imagine the human being, what the human being is capable of, and human beings would begin to be capable of imagining themselves. That they are made in such a way that they have an imagination. And therefore, They will think always of what is the next, right? They will want to voyage. They will want to journey. There'll be a desire to find out who I really am, not just who I was said to be. And that dynamic desire, so he calls it a dynamic reverie, the dream that we live in, of constantly wondering what could be yet ahead of us. That is what's godlike about us, that God created us with that particular way of working, that we work ourselves. And when we make things, we are also working ourselves. When we make objects, when we write a story, when we write a poem or a piece of music, we are also exploring ourselves, and that's the most important part of it. I'm bringing into being the most important part of me that needs to be brought out. I haven't yet got there. And with this, let's go to Abraham. God says to Abraham, Perik Yud, beginning of the Parsha, famous beginning, Vayomer Elokim. Vayomer Hashem El Avram. God said to Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha. Get going. Lech lecha. Get going from your land, your birthplace, the house of your father, Ela Aretz Asher Areka, to the land which I will show you. That is, as Rashi points out, if you look at your source sheet, number 2, we'll leave number 1, hopefully for later. Asher Areka, it's a few lines down. To the land which I shall show you. Lo gilalo haaretz miyad. God didn't reveal to Adam, to Avram, God didn't reveal to Avram where he's going immediately. That is, God didn't immediately set the facts on the table and, full disclosure. There you are. Now you know. You can plan your journey. Everything under control. Instead, what did God do? He deliberately did not reveal. How do we know that he did not reveal? Not just because he doesn't say where Avram's to go, but because he says, Asher Areka, which I will show you. As soon as God says Asher Areka, he's saying to Avram, I'm not telling you where you're going. That's a specific of the journey. That's certainly a characteristic of the journey, that you're going to travel without knowing where you're going. Why did he do that? That could be quite a kind of distressing, to travel blind without knowing where you're going. And here, paradoxically, Rashi explains the mystery by saying, Kedei lechabeva be'einav, in order to make it lovable in his eyes. It's a wonderful word, lechabev, to make something lovable, or chaviv. Human being is chaviv adam shenivra b'tzelem. Yeah, from Pirkei Avot, the Mishnah Avot, Perik Gimel. Beloved is the human being. Beloved is the human being who was created in the image of God. There's a connection here. What is this belovedness? What does it mean? So I looked it up and just wrote. I have some idea of how Chazal use it. I think I came up with some interesting English words. Cherished, right? Lechabev is to cherish, which is not just a feeling in the heart, I love you. It's, in a sense, I'm working with you all the time. I'm caressing you. I want to know what you can become. Right? It's hands-on. There's something there. I'm engaged with you. It's affection, but it's more than affection. It's intimate. God is being intimate with human beings when he values human beings and he gives them a sense of their own capacities, that they too can create. That's chaviv. So why does God not tell Abraham where he's going? Precisely to free his imagination, not to clip the wings of his imagination, not to give him an image, which wouldn't leave him any room, which would clip his wings, but rather said he would think and imagine and speculate What kind of land is it? And is it the land that I really want? Actually, we could look at the Mea Shiloach now. Just, it turned out well. Let's have a look at the first the number one. To the land which I will show you. Mea Shiloach, 19th century Hasidic master, extraordinary reading. Avram was full of great desire to know the place of his life intimacy with God. He wanted to know the place, meaning the land, his own home, where he would be able to know a certain vital intimacy with God. That is, of being like God in some way. And that was Abraham's desire. How far that goes. So now he's not thinking.
Excuse me, Aviva, where are you reading the Mea Shiloach? In source 6?
Source 1.
It's a different order on the sheet. It is 6. And Rashi was 1. What you did before with like the end of the number 1 Rashi.
Oh my goodness. So that's an error. I mean, it's my error with the source sheets. All right, we're going to have to just okay, so you don't have this all together. No, because the number 6.
We have something on source 6, Mea Shiloach.
Yeah, but that's different.
Okay.
That's yet ahead of us. All right. Let me just say very briefly what he says here. He says, I know that's what you want. You want that kind of, to find out the power and the reach of your own desire to know God, to be with God in some way. Where will that happen to you? It'll happen to you in a place that I call Asher Areka. It'll always be in the future, Asher Areka. It'll be infinite. You'll never arrive at your ultimate intimacy. You'll always have a possibility of moving on. It's going to be a journey, in other words. And this is, in other words, you will become the subject of, becoming a subject of transformation. You will become someone who's always moving onwards because you can't remain just where you are. Now that notion, this is the journey of Abraham. And this is basically what God wants of him. V'heyeh bracha, the verse ends. I'll make you into the second verse. Ve'escha legoy gadol, I will bless you, I will make your name great. V'heyeh bracha. And you will be blessing. Be blessing. What does that mean? Be blessing. And here Rashi says, you will become a source of blessing yourself. Up to now, everything good that happened to you was as a result of my divine blessing to Adam and to Noah. We're told that when it came to the first human beings, God blessed them and their children. So anything good that happened in the world came directly from God. Now I'm handing the keys of the palace over to you to some extent. You will be able to bless whoever you wish. Now that's a kind of dizzying prospect. There's a great power now being put into human hands to do something called blessing, which is connected with creation. That you will be able in some way to reform and remold the givens in order to make them fruitful. Now that is in that you are like God. In that power, in your creative and imaginative power. Now let's look at the Midrash in Breshit Rabbah, which on your page probably is source 3 then. Yes? Breshit Rabbah. What do we have here? Abraham, at some point, according to the philosophers, according to the Rambam, for instance, which he's on the page, but I'm not going to look at it closely with you. According to the Rambam, he got to know God at the age of 40. Hikir et Elokim, Hikir et HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he was 40. Now, what form did that knowledge take? The Rambam does not give you any images. He wipes away any possibility of a source for that knowledge and simply says that he knew God. He came to it in his own mind, just by thinking in a exploratory way, really through logic. who makes this and then who made them, and driving it back to the first cause, like Aristotle. But the Midrash gives us something rather different here. How did Abraham come to know God? God said to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha. And immediately then we have another proof text. Rabbi Yitzchak began to quote a text from the book of Psalms. Shim'i bat uri, listen, daughter, and see, and incline your ear, and forget your people and the house of your father. Now that is a verse presumably about a young woman who is being told by those who are older and wiser than her to embark on, it turns out, on a bridal journey. That she is a bride and she has become engaged to someone that she doesn't know. She's never met him. And she is now going, her task now is to open up her senses, or let's say her sensual imagination, and see and hear and forget. Move past the fixed images of childhood, in which, for instance, there is a relationship with a father with which she might well have remained content. Right? Oedipal, there are Oedipal implications in it. Leave the house of your father. And of course, it echoes Abraham, where God says to Abraham, leave the house of your father. The Midrash develops that in connection with the proof text and says the bride is here being urged to detach herself from an original attachment to her father and everything around that, and go and alert herself now to new sensual experiences. Now, this is the mashal, this is the parable. And just as we are becoming interested, the Midrash breaks off. It's one of these very disturbing, sudden frustrations. We want to carry on with this. The next verses in Psalms carry on the story. And we'll come back to that at the end of the Midrash. In the meantime, oh no, we have other business now. Let's think now about a person. There was someone, Echad, who was traveling from place to place, over mimakom lemakom. He went to one possible place, one image to another image to another. He had various places in which he might have stopped. And then one day he saw a castle, doleket, bira doleket. Now the interesting thing about this is that it could mean two opposite things. Talking about ambiguity. What is that he sees? One view is that he sees a castle that's all lit up, illumined, all the lights are on, and there's clearly a lot of life going on in that case. It's a beautiful, beautiful castle, well cared for. You know, the other view is just the opposite, that it's a castle on fire. Now, this is a castle that's burning down. And his reaction then, Amar, he says, would you say that this castle is without anyone in charge? No. If he is looking at an illumined castle, a lit up castle, then presumably he's saying, as if it's obviously absurd, now, would you really say there's no one in charge of such a, beautifully cared for, beautifully radiant castle? Obviously not. But if it's a castle on fire, then perhaps he's saying the opposite. Are you going to tell me there is anyone in charge here? Now, the truth is that the Tomar tends to the first reading more. And that's awkward in terms of the view that I want to present here. I want to still insist that there is an ambiguity here. There is, and we're not quite sure what it is that he is reacting to. But immediately what happens is, Hitzitz alav bal habira. The owner of the castle glances out at him. Hitzitz. The Hitzitz is the fairly common word in rabbinic Hebrew for to look at. But there is a sense about it, even in the sound of it, hatzatza, of a kind of sparking glance, of a kind of sharp eyes eyes meet his eyes. So Hitzitza la balabira, Amarlo anihu balabira, and said to him, God, the owner of the castle says to him, I'm the owner of the castle. I'm in charge here. In this way, right, there's a parable, and the parable is now translated. So was Avraham Avinu. He was wandering from place to place, looking for something, looking for a place to be. He said, and he sees this, he said, would you say that this world is without anyone in charge? That is, the Midrash continues very much in the negative direction. Here it's resolved. It seems very clear that the Midrash wants to tell you that he is not happy with the state of the world. It seems to be that there's no one in charge. Hitzitz alav, sorry. Tomar sha'olam hazeh b'lo manhig. No, it still remains ambiguous, I'm sorry. Hitzitz alav HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So God then glanced at him and said to him, I am in charge of the world. Ani bala olam. Okay. And then, having said that little vignette, the Midrash goes back to its original theme of the bride traveling to an unknown bridegroom, and having to detach herself from everything that she's known. And we go back to the next verse in Psalms. And the king shall desire your beauty. Ki hu Adonai, for he is your Lord. That is, you will find your place to be, your real place to be, the person with whom you will have a marriage relationship. You will find it in that unknown space, which at the moment you may perhaps be feeling quite anxious about, and he will desire your beauty. And that's a very down-to-earth description of sensual married life, that the king desires, the bridegroom will desire the bride. But look at what the Midrash does with it. The king will desire your beauty is translated as the king will want, liyapotech ba'olam, to make you beautiful in the world, to affect you in some way by this relationship, so that you will become radiant in the world, that you will have an effect on the world. In other words, his interest in you will not be something static, right? You're beautiful. Now I'm going to have a relationship with you, and then I'll have what I want. But rather, to start off in her a process of becoming more and more beautiful for the sake of the world, for the sake of what she can do to the world. Now, there are so many things that are strange about this that I really can just touch on it. One of the things that's strange is, again, the two-ness of it. There was a couple at the beginning, and that was Avicha. There was she and her father, and she's going to leave him and everything that she's known. Then there's a future two-ness. There's the husband. And Avraham is the bride. Avraham is feminine. She is female. Beauty is relevant in talking about her. Why this feminine imagery? It's not something that I feel easy with. In a way, it makes me a little uneasy. Well, especially now in terms of everything we know and think about in terms of gender studies and so on. That's not really where I want to go. I want to say that Midrash is making us deliberately uneasy. There's a certain anxiety, which is the anxiety of reading a sacred text. Reading a text that has something to do with what you don't yet know. I don't have enough information, really, when I read this, to just say, oh yes, that's just what I expected to read. Why is Avraham a woman? Suddenly there's something, it gets our imagination going. As far as the reader's imagination is concerned, it gets us, Avraham as a woman, Avraham Avinu, he's called our father, he's very clearly gendered, and his Zerah, and so on and so on. But here he is as a woman, meaning if you're dealing with clay, if you're dealing with flour and water, dust and water, then you have to expect all kinds of strange images to come up and not be frightened of them. That the images can actually lead you places. And to think of Abraham with this kind of resonant, if I can use this expression, you should see and hear. Be fully alive to what's going to happen to you. This is the receptivity, the resonant receptivity of the female, of the feminine, of someone whom the king will want to transform into a source of beauty and blessing. And of course, the nimshal, the parable there is that that's what God wants of Abraham. He wants of Abraham to continue with something he's already started, which is to become a full subject, to become someone who's capable of imagining himself and his possible growth and where he might still want to be and do, in spite of the fact that he is in some ways apparently very limited. He's been cut off from everything that gives him his culture and his background and so forth. And there is a sense somewhere of being caught in midair. But that precisely will be what will give him the push. It'll give him a gentle push into dynamism. Certain you'll be cut off from the stable, secure images. And now you have to begin to become effective yourself. You have to begin to feel what happens to the dust and the water once it lets itself be, as if Abraham. Why does God choose Abraham? This is a classic question that's asked. This is the great beginning of the Jewish story, the Jewish destiny, and we're given no real reason for the choice of Abraham. Ramban famously asked the question, what was the grounds? We're looking for safe grounds here. Abraham was a tzaddik. Abraham, tell us something good he did. Nothing. It's an irrational choice, or an irrational choice on the part of God. Why? And the assumption somewhere is, and everyone who tries to say something meaningful about this, and we'll see as we go on, that Abraham is, he is someone, he is something, he is material that has a desire to develop. That he is not just raw material, that God can say, right, I'm setting you on a journey. That he has in himself a desire to be discovered, that is, to discover what is essential to him. He hasn't got there yet. In order to find who he really is, this dynamic being, something is going to happen. And he's waiting for it in some ways. Not just that God does it to him, that God says to him out of the blue, as it seems. It's that the person that God is talking to is someone who has desire and can hear what God says.
But Avivah, is there something in the text that shows that this man has that potential?
No. We'll see when we come to the end how the problem is resolved by the Sfat Emet. I don't want to spoil the story. But the idea somewhere is that what God loves in Avram is precisely what is not stable and fixed in him. What has potential? What is in a way aching with potential? That Avram is someone who is not settled. Even the fact that he has a wife who's barren. Right? But already in terms of the condition of a life, it's something that doesn't allow him to settle. And that somewhere there is a restless spirit here. And in the best possible sense. The Mea Shiloach, we finally get to the Mea Shiloach, focuses on this and says something which I've always loved. Number 7, right? We're not going to look at the Ramban or the Rambam, although you are, as always, invited to read the sources yourselves. God said to Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha, right? Here's the answer to your question, if you will, Dara. Why does God say, what's that lecha? Go to you. No. Any sensible linguistic professional would say it doesn't mean anything. It's just a little enclitic, the Greeks called it. It's a way of saying get going. Tach lecha, lech lecha. It just means get going. It's certain energy in it. Lech. It's never translated as go to you, But that's exactly the way, that's the energy, that's where the energy comes from, the Meir Shiloach says. And as we'll see, that lecha becomes the most important word in this brief story. So what does the Meir Shiloach say here? First of all, before we get to the Lech Lecha, the first half of the passage here, deals with Abraham's prior quest. What we might think we have no evidence for in the text. But all along, he has been, what does he been? He has been searching and seeking. Hitchil Abraham levakesh ulechapes, the second line, after the root of his own life. He's not looking for what makes the spheres go round, as the philosophers would put it. What makes the world turn? He's looking for something very personal and very intimate. What's the root of me? What am I? What am I really? Why am I so troubled? Meir Shiloach goes on to say. That becomes the main theme. But at the moment, let's just read what we have here. He's looking for the root of his own life after he has realized, he's had a basic realization, that he has to leave everything that is false, that is a misperception. Everything that's a distortion in his quest, he has to leave that behind. That he already knows. How does he know it? Because God says, leave your land and your birthplace. In other words, when God says it, that's something that Avram already knows. So in a way, Avram knows that already, that he has to set all that aside. He's found that out for himself, because he knows that all those desires of this world, as the Meir Shiloach puts it, all the earthly desires, the sensual desires, are really nothing, right? There's nothing in them. That's not where you're going to find the root of your own life. Okay, so how are you going to find it? And God then, he's looking for the body of life. What's the actual basis of life, the vital basis on which the world, my world, the world has been created? What's the basis of it all? And God answers him, Lech Lecha. Go to your own self. Don't look out there in the cycles of creation. Look into your own self, because really, you're quite right. None of the things of this world can be called life. Those are not life. Ikarei achayim tinsa lecha. The main, the core of living, you will find in yourself. And it seems to me it's as if ikar chayim is being used almost as a verb rather than a noun. It's not that you will find an image in yourself. An image of God. That's what I really want. That's me. No, you will be finding in your own living, when you really live, when you are really dynamic, when you are really moving on and searching for something that feels true, then you will find it in yourself. And it quotes from Yeshayahu, "Va'ata tagil b'Hashem." In your own joy in God, you will discover joy in yourself. It's a verb, right? You'll find, right? There's a process at work here, which is in a way endless. And zot hu achayim. So what is life? Life is living. Life is living in the full sense. It's not a thing at all. And then we come to the Midrash. The Meir Shiloach now commenting on the Midrash about the bride and about the traveler. And God looking, the owner of the castle, looking out at Abraham. Hitzitz alav HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he points out that the idiom should really be Hitzitz elav. Hitzitz elav. He looked at him, as if Abraham is the object and God is the subject. God is looking at him and saying, hello, I want to introduce myself. I'm the owner. I know what you've been asking yourself, and I'm coming to provide that information. Why alav? And Meir Shiloach goes on to say, this is So sweet. He goes on to say that he is drawing Abraham's attention to himself. He is saying, look at you. Tir'eh be'atzmecha. Right? Don't look outwards. Look inwards. Look at you. Isn't it strange and isn't it wonderful? Isn't it amazing the way you have been reacting? So it's a kind of introspective, reflexive is really the word for it. It's real reflexivity. How are you going to know what journey you should be on? Only by becoming aware of your own responses, of what is happening. No one else is troubled by the burning world. There's a whole little passage about that there. But everyone else, no one else is not kashelo. It's not, there's no questions. They're not agitated. They're not turbulent. Only you here, im benafsho. You are turbulent in your spirit. You have a life that is full of turbulence and seeking and not satisfied with what the surface shows. In other words, you have an imaginative spirit, and you know you can't be satisfied with the looks of things. Now, that, I think, is one of the things we mean by a religious spirit. Of course, there are many creative people who look below the surface and probe the depths of things with their imaginations. That's what creative people do, who are not formally religious. So it's obvious. At the same time, I might say, in a certain mood, when I'm looking at things in a certain way, that is precisely what is meant by religious. Religious is that which the surface doesn't enchant. That the surface is all very well and it serves certain purposes, but I need to go inside. I need to get my hands in this. I need to get right inside. And there is a very sensual image to deal with the sensuality of the world and with the complications of its being not one thing, but two things. That there is body and soul, that there's water, that there are two things there. And to work them in such a way as to find out, to get to know what is at the root of it all. Where do I go once I really start exploring? Where the whole story of Abraham as imaginative spirit begins for the Mea Shiloach is in Abraham's haramot libcha, Abraham's turbulence, the commotion in his heart, the lack of acceptance he's anything but phlegmatic about what he sees in the world. And a lot of his reactions are the reactions of, this can't be right. They're negative reactions. Reactions that the philosopher is the one who is full of wonder, according to Aristotle, right? And the Rambam is very affected by that in his story of Avraham. Avraham is full of the wonder at the world. Who made this? But Mea Shiloach is much more, what can I say? He's much more insistent on almost a psychoanalytic view of Avraham. That Avraham is a troubled person. Right? He's troubled because the dimensions of his life, the way his life seems to present itself to him and the life of the world, of those around him, simply creates in him a sense of dissatisfaction. And who roused you to that dissatisfaction? What's the source of that dissatisfaction? That is God. That God is pointing out to Abraham that I roused you. Look at you, become aware of yourself and of how you react to experience. And what is that imaginative faculty that you have for seeing beyond? Know that that's really me, that I aroused you to that. Now that's quite a far-reaching reading. And I think it really is all there in the Mea Shiloach. It certainly is all there in another source that I didn't put on your page, which is the Tzidkat HaTzadik, Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, whose Rebbe the Mea Shiloach was, right? He was the student of the Mea Shiloach. And he carries this idea just slightly but radically a little bit further. And he says this, the way you are, the fact that you're full of questioning, that you're full of questions, that you're looking for something beyond the surface, and you're looking for something beyond the surface of yourself. That is אתה בעצמך גם כן מכלל בעל הבירה. You yourself are also ani. The בעל הבירה, the owner of the castle, says, ani, I am the owner of the castle. And for Rabbi Tzadok Cohen, God is saying, ani, who is ani? It's that in you that makes you part of me. You are part, you are B'Tselem Elokim, in that sense, like a holograph, perhaps. You are not, you can't do everything God can do, but you have the essential thing, and the essential thing is that germination. B'libcha makom shchinati. And that's a more classic way of putting it. In your heart is the place of my presence. Now, that's not so terrible to say. Yeah? In your heart is the place of my presence, but it's still going rather far. It's still saying, if you want to find me, you have to look in the depths of your heart. Now, we're talking here then about the creative aspect of experience. And we're talking about that as having a religious quality in itself, because becoming aware of what's in the depths, having one's hands in, becoming aware of the endless possibilities of the depths and of the searching, means that in a way, anything and everything can be both you and God. It can be a kind of combination of your being and the Shekhinah, God's presence in you. And it moves you on constantly from where you are. Right? Nothing is simply a stable object to be admired and to say, right, I got this, now that's it. Rather, a quote from Emerson is a wonderful sentence, in which he says about language, he says, all language is vehicular and transitive. That is a vehicle and a means of transit. It takes you places. Language takes you places. Imagination takes you places, and is good as ferries and horses are for conveyance, not as farms and houses are for homestead. Meaning, right down to it, what does language do? It isn't something you can settle down in. You have a form of words and you can settle down in it. Any language that really is language carries you on. It leads to you thinking of other things. The words themselves give birth to other words. Now, I don't know if this, certainly poetic language is like that. And God does address Avram with quite poetic language. But I think Emerson means all language. He would take it further. That language has that intermediate quality, that it's not something that's fixed, even though the words can be typed out and printed and so on. Immediately you start being with the words, your mind is taken to different places. And that is the quality that we're talking about here. D.H. Lawrence, while I'm with the literary geniuses, has a sentence in one of his letters, one of the early letters, which I'm quite impressed by. He writes, one has to be so terribly religious to be an artist. I'll leave that to simmer. What did he mean by so terribly religious? If not something of what we're speaking about here. Let's see how we move on with the sources and see where this takes us now. Meantime, the impact of God's revelation to Avram, Lech Lecha, is to shift Avram's attention to himself, to the depths of himself, the surprising things he may find if he goes beyond the surface. And with this, I want to move to the next midrash on your page, which is number 8. I don't know if it's number 8 on your page, it's probably 7. Reshit Rabbah Lamed Bet. God said to Abram, quotation now from Song of Songs. L'reach shmanecha tovim, your ointments yield sweet smell. Shemen turak shemecha, your name is the finest oils. What a strange analogy. Who is being addressed here? Midrash elsewhere says that this verse is being addressed to Abraham. Abraham is compared now not to a woman, not to a bride, but to something that seems to have rather feminine associations as well. Ointments, oils. You know, I would perhaps translate this as perfume, except that the Midrash seems to have something else in mind. Right? Let's say precious oils of one kind or another, spices, and we're appealing now, we're talking here about the sense of smell, which is a very sensual sense. And Abraham is that sensuality in himself, in the mind of God. I can put it like that. That when God is working with the material of Abraham, he's saying, you are really fine stuff to work with. It gives me pleasure to work with you. There's potential here, right? I'm really reducing it. There's a sense of singularity. And Rabbi Brachia continues. Who are we talking about here? What was Abraham like? Here we have one source for this. He was like a tight-fitting jar, flask, full of balsamic essence of some kind. All right, so that takes us away perhaps from the perfume image. I'm not too sure what balsamic tastes like, smells like, but you use it in cooking, I'm aware, but whatever, it's a fragrance. And suddenly Abraham is fragrance. That's the image here. It's not a stable image. That's not an image that I can just say, oh yeah, okay, what's the next thing? What? Abraham is, what are we talking about here? The problem with such a closed up bottle of precious essence is that its fragrance can't evaporate out into the world. It can't imbue the world. It can't affect the world. It's not effective. If it's in the bottle, it's not doing perfume. So what has to happen here? But once the flask is opened and metaltelet and shaken, then its fragrance diffuses in the world. I used to have this image of old in the old days when the lady at the counter used to open up a precious tester and wave it in the air. There's that little wave movement to get it going, so that you can see its effect, you can feel its effect. This is what God said to Abraham. So it's really almost a surrealistic image. Abraham as this. It's a substance, almost not a substance, because it's so capable of affecting and changing and being affected. God said to Abraham, Taltel atzmacha mimakom lemakom. Agitate yourself, shake yourself up. And you should give yourself a push, not I'm going to push you. Why doesn't God give Abraham a push? No, because the imagination itself creates things that push you on further, right? You see what I mean? If you're thinking about, I can only talk about my own experience. If I'm thinking about, let's say, a class I've given, and suddenly some words that I said in the class come back to me, and suddenly my own words begin to resonate, and I begin to hear what else, where else I could have gone, that something about that power. God says to Abraham, you have that in you. Don't just let it lie. Do something with it. In other words, get traveling, move yourself around literally from one place to the other, and your name will become great in the world. In other words, you could say it on the lowest level, that you don't keep your perfume all corked up here in Haran. Go out into the world and everyone will know about you and you'll spread the good news. what you have to tell the world. You'll meet your destiny in that sense. But clearly, the more inward, the more intimate meaning is there. The more intimate meaning is this almost divine, right? You're saying this B'Tselem Elokim, the capacity for affecting the world with an almost nothing. Yeah. What is that thing in Abraham, which is the essence of him? It's something that is not a thing. It's something that is a process. It's a capacity for growth, a capacity for being the source of blessing to others. And in a sense, Abraham has it, and everyone else can have it too. But here we're focusing on Abraham. Telltale, shake yourself up. Now, the word tiltul has all kinds of, again, you looked it up in Jestro, because I knew already some part of this. I'll read a list of translations. To shake up, to be confused, to be distraught, to be deranged, to lose one's balance. Now, in other words, it could have dismaying meanings, telltale, tiltul, to shake up, right? Of torment almost. And Abraham, therefore, is a person who is not to give himself an easy time, that he is to go places externally and internally where he'll have difficult material to deal with. And in some way then, through working with these places, he will have an effect on the world. He will be almost like, I want to use the expression that Chazal use a great deal, of course, which is the expression remez, the expression to be a hint. That Abraham will really just, the bottle of perfume with a drop of precious perfume, essential perfume, balsam, is very potent, but almost not there. It's almost nothing. Like a hint. It's a kind of minimum reality. It has very little to do, you might say, with reality. Well, reality is much over, what's the expression? What's the word I want?
Rated?
Overrated, thank you. The reality, of course, one has to take account for it. That you knock your foot. This is the realists always say. If you knock your leg against a stone wall, you'll feel it. You'll know about reality, right? And we know plenty about that. Reality is very big in our lives. Big, that's reality. But there's something small, and it's called a hint. And I'm thinking here, to share with you very, very briefly, something that Adam Phillips, the British psychoanalyst, talks about in one of his books. The book is called The Beast in the Nursery. He quotes 3 great creative artists, thinkers, who all use this word hint. That what we need is just a hint. That's really all we need to get working with. Keats, for instance, where does Keats say it? One moment. Right, let me start with Wittgenstein. I'll find Keats afterwards. Wittgenstein was asked by someone if he liked Kierkegaard's work. And he said, well, yes, up to a point. But he said he got hints. Wittgenstein says, I get hints. Hints do it for me. I don't like someone else's thought all chewed up. I really don't need to know in great length what Kierkegaard thinks. What I appreciate is the kind of thinking that gives me hints. It gives me something to work on. It arouses me. Or rare is a big word for the sages. All Avram needs is to be aroused. To be aroused for something in him, which I want to say is not so different from the creative imagination, which is what he has in common with God. The imaginative mind, right? Here's Henry James. The mind takes to itself the faintest hints of life. He also uses the word hints. The imaginative mind must convert the very pulses of the air into revelations. We don't normally get large-scale revelations. Religious revelations, and I'm applying it that way now, don't come in full scale, it seems, these days. Not usually. What we get is perhaps sometimes, occasionally, a hint. And what does the hint say? Here's Keats. He talks about how he would rather be the flower than the bee. He doesn't want to be a busy bee, buzzing around everywhere and doing its work. He wants to be the flower, which is in a way receptive. And the flower then takes hints from every noble insect that comes to visit. In other words, it's all very hidden. The dynamic process of the continuation of life and of the creation of life comes in a minor form. All it is, a little insect coming and just drops a little hint into the flower. Oh, what a happy flower. That's who Keats would rather be than the bee that's just busy all the time. So there's something there. It's almost humorous, but that's part of what we're talking about here. The ability to be humorous, a certain sense of humor about the direness of reality, how that works out in real life is perhaps something else. But notice, tel atzmacha, God says, move yourself around. That's a double root. Tal, latul, litol, to take. When you double it, it becomes full of energy. Tel atzmacha, like lech lecha. You can't help thinking it's an echo of lech lecha. Why wouldn't lech be enough? Lech, go to Eretz Yisrael. Plain and simple. Lech means go on a journey to a destination. But lech lecha, oops, suddenly you have a combination of things. You have energy. You have go out and in. Suddenly you're working with something. And with this, then I want to go on to the next midrash, which is, I think it's the last midrash on our, yes, I think it's number 8 on your page. Lecha tal yaldutecha. God says to Abraham, again, a proof text from, where is the proof text from? I don't know. I don't remember. To you is the dew of your youth. This applies to Abraham. What does it mean? Abraham, according to the Midrash here, Abraham was anxious, mitpached. He was in an unstable state. He was anxious. He was worrying. He said, would you say that I'm holding in my hand sin? That somewhere part of what I'm in contact with in myself is sin, because I used to worship idols all those early years. In other words, Abraham is worried about the past, and perhaps the past is still present, and perhaps if he's looking into himself, perhaps there are still residues of that past, and he's really worried about it. Perhaps that's the material, not very hopeful material. And God reassures him and says to him, Lecha tal yaldutecha. The dew of your youth is for you. It will work. It's part of your journey. It will work out as part of you. Lecha. Lech lecha. Now, this is a little more complicated. Why is it suddenly the dew? Why are his sins dew in this image? That's a very unstable image. What does that mean? And the answer that's offered here is ma tal ze poreach. Just as this dew evaporates, so your sins evaporate. Just as this dew is a sign of blessing to the world, indicates blessing, hints at blessing to the world, so you are a hint of blessing. Siman bracha. I'm minimizing, I'm micronizing siman. It's not an indubitable proof of anything, but you and your sin indicate something in a very suggestive way, something that can be worked with. And that is now compared to dew. Why on earth dew? Why are his sins like dew? And here I'll just gesture at number 10 on your page. Hamashal betal porech, the dew that evaporates. You've got to understand this, he says. And he refers to a passage in the Talmud in Ta'anit, which you have in number 9, written out there, which tells us this, that in the book of Hosea, Sefer Hosea, we have the people asking to know God. Let us know and pursue knowledge of God. In other words, they're on the hunt. They want God. There's something very purposeful and major about it. They were very, very serious. But that was a desire, a question, a quest that was lo kahogen. That wasn't the right kind of question, the Talmud says. That's not what you should be asking for. To know God, I'm setting out now on a serious journey to know God. That's not the way it works. God answered them properly. He answered them in the mode that they should learn, and he answers them. So let me finish what the improper question was. Right? We want to know God like the morning dew. Right? Sorry. The knowledge of God comes triumphantly from the east. It comes from in the morning, and it should come like rain to us. Right? What we want is a good rainfall of God's presence, and then we'll know we've really got it. We're there. Amar la Kadosh Baruch Hu, God answers Knesset Yisrael and says, Biti, my daughter, you're asking for something that is sometimes desirable and sometimes not desirable. Sometimes it's good to have a good revelation rainfall, and sometimes it can be a bit much. It may not be what you really want. But I will be to you something that is always desirable. Shene'emar eheyeh katal Israel. As it said, I will be like dew to Israel. Dew is something that imperceptibly falls in the early morning, and by the time you get up, you may very well not see it. And that's what I will be to you. And the Shem Yishmuel makes of this something very beautiful. He says this. He says, what's wrong with rain? Why is the rain image really not a sagacious choice? It's not an imaginative choice. Let me follow that. It's not an imaginative choice. Because what does the rain do? The rain comes heavily and remains on the ground. And there it is. There's the rain. It floods the ground. Do you know what too much rain can do? Mabul. What was the mabul if not too much rain? Right? The heavens were opened and the depths were opened. And the Midrash actually says that if man is made of dust, then too much rain is going to flood him out of existence. He'll just fall. He'll mikporer. He will disintegrate entirely. You need some water, not too much. So if you want to follow that imaginative imagery. And so for the Shem Yishmuel, how does he put it? He says, so rain, all right, it comes down, it moistens the earth, and it stays there. You can know there's been a rainfall. And God answers that in that case, there will be no sense that the moisture comes from the earth itself. It will be simply a rainfall from elsewhere onto the inert earth. Now, if we imagine now Knesset Yisrael, does Knesset Yisrael really want to be what's the word? Inundated by revelation? Much better if God comes like the dew and people have a sense that the moisture, in a sense, has been aroused out of themselves. That the dew is just sufficient, like a hint, to arouse the inner moisture. Now, this is an imaginative description of a dynamic process. That's how you can more or less see it happening, that the dew falls and something comes alive from the inside and there's no dew left because the dew evaporates and the plant has come alive. And that sense of your inner resources as being part of the couple, that when it comes to imagination, there has to always be a couple. You don't want to be drowned out and you don't want to be left dry. The dry earth, the dry spirit wants something from outside, wants something from God. But it has to be something that can act like a hint. It has a dynamic effect, it has a generative effect. And what the effect is to make us generative, to awake in us that power which connects us with God, which is almost not there. You can't see it with the naked eye. And that thing that is not a thing, but a way of being in the world, a way of being creative in the world. That for the Sfatimet, we finish with that. The last source. Again, the question is, why was Abraham chosen without any mention of being made of chibato? There's that word chaviv again. Of why God should specially love him. Why did God choose to lechavev oto? Why did God cherish him? There's nothing special about him that we could see. And the answer, in a way, frustrates logic. Because the only thing we can say about Abraham is that once God did choose him, he responded. There was a resonant response from Abraham. He heard what God said. God tries to say these things to everyone, and only Abraham could hear. Now that being becomingness in Abraham, that readiness, that thirst in Abraham is why he was chosen. Of course, it doesn't really work so well rationally. What was the evidence of that? Well, God knows Abraham. But really, that's not what he says. What he says is the proof is in the eating. When you see how Abraham reacted, then you know why God chose Abraham. That's the shevach of Abraham. All right, it's in the future, but it's in the present. It may not yet have developed. It's there in potential. And that's why God chose Abraham, even if there hasn't been much effect of it as yet. Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem. Precious is the human being who's created in the image of God, right? The Mishnah. Chiba yetera noda'at lo shenivra b'tzelem. A singular, a special preciousness. What is it that really is lovable in human beings? Is if a human being begins to live with the awareness of having that capacity, of being, of something to aspire to, of something that is not yet fully realized in him and becomes realized by the exercise of a certain kind of imagination, of an imagination that takes one beyond the surfaces. And perhaps, it's not where we've got yet, perhaps once the Torah is given, that will be good material for the human being to work on, for the Jewish human being. But at the moment, we are really talking in universals. We're still talking in universals, that there is this capacity in all human beings. And Abraham, in that generation, was the only one who had it. And that's why God chose him. Yes. Have I aroused anyone to anything? Questions, criticism, thoughts?
Avivah,
Yes, who is this?
it's Ruthie.
Ruthie, yes.
Yeah. So I have heard you teach the burning castle several times, and in conjunction with the bride, and now in conjunction altogether, finally it's penetrating like the dew. And all I kept thinking about this morning was the comparison or the to Rivka as the Avram and Rivka. Rivka is the bride who goes off on this journey and she's willing to go to this other place and she knows nothing. But I always had the sense that Rivka was, she was waiting. She was always waiting for this to happen. And when it did happen, her first words are, I'm going. Like she was
Yeah.
ready.
Elech, yeah. That's
Yeah.
the authentic self speaking. She's springing in response. She's
And she is complicated, and she is, but now
and
I
she's
see.
like, yes, she's like Abraham.
Yeah.
There is that's in Chazal. You know, she is a chesed person. Abraham is. That's the one word I didn't use, which I
Yeah.
should have used.
And
I-
she is. And
That's what.
she's
Go
so,
ahead. Go ahead. Yes.
and she is so complicated. She's complexed, in her life with the children and how she handles her children. And just everything about her. First, she seems enigmatic, and then in the end, she's also enigmatic.
Yes. Yeah. Artists are not. Someone said to me recently, artists are not necessarily nice people. I'm not implying this to our subject. She's an artist, so I think she was talking from some kind of inner sense of things. But yes, the interesting thing is that that Rivka is compared to Abraham by Chazal. That they have this really, in a way, the bride it's a bride for Yitzchak. It's really for my master, for Eliezer's master. It's the master who needs someone who represents something similar to himself to come into the household. And that's called chesed. And that's the one thing I didn't develop, which I meant to develop. Olam chesed yibaneh. That things are built up through chesed. And chesed is not just loving kindness. It's not just ethical. I shouldn't say just. Ethical is a great deal. Beyond ethical, it's also simply, it's phenomenological. It's the creativity. Chesed is creativity, is the ability to go beyond, to go to more, to generate.
And one more thing to add, which I just heard this morning, the Haftarah for Lech Lecha is Yeshayahu, end of 40, beginning of 41. And there's that quote, it's the Heir, that mi Heir mi Mizrach. Then and the rabbis say, well, that's Avram. And now, of course, with your shiur together, that's the stirring. It is Avram. So I just having here
Thank you.
things together was terrific.
Thank you. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Aviva,
Yes.
I just wanted to say that looking in the psukim, like when you hear this whole idea of arousing this special element of humankind, really to seek and to follow the journey, and you think of the greatness of Abraham, that he was able to hear, and my first thought after listening to you was, what was he thinking when this was happening within himself? This turmoil of where to go, what to do, where to seek. And I'm looking at the psukim, and immediately in Pasuk Daled, Vayelech Avram. Like, what was so special about him, which I think you brought out to me, was that he just heard this and understood this immediately. And because of that, he became Av Hamon Goyim. He became the father of the nation.
Yes.
He just became in sync with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's desires. And this gives inspiration for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, for some reason I'm Dara. Okay, yes, go ahead.
I am so happy to be back. This class
Cindy.
was, if it was just for me, it was, I feel like it was just for me. I just, at this time in my life, I don't know how to thank you. God bless you.
I feel we're talking, obviously, I didn't want to say the obvious. We are talking against a background of reality that is daunting. And it's against that background that we're learning this material.
Yeah, and we have to keep living the best we can with that inner whatever it is that we need to do to spark. You were my do this morning.
Aviva,
Yes.
several times today during your shiur, I couldn't help but think of the Arabic endearment, Habibi. And a lot of us, especially those of us in the United States, could use a little endearment today. And unfortunately, I don't know enough Arabic to know what the plural of Habibi is, but I just want to say Habibiot. I wish you all well. Thank you, Aviva.
Thank you very much. That was very
I just
lovely.
have two trivial comments.
Yeah.
One is when you were talking about,
Yeah.
Abraham being shaken, it made me think that when the priests are inaugurated, I think that they're lifted up. And
That's right.
shaken
That's
is
the
not
word
the
that's
same
used.
word, but
Yeah.
you know, they're also shaken.
Oh, that's really good. That's really wonderful. And they are a blessing, of course. Because they become sources of blessing.
Right.
Yeah.
And then even more trivial though, is that even before
Not so
we read,
trivial, not trivial. Oh.
even before we read the thing about the do, I was thinking that metaltel is the same root as do. You know, I don't know if they're really related or not, but that
As do?
as do, as tal. I mean, it's spelled.
Oh, as do, sorry. Right.
Lamed.
Absolutely. Yes.
Lamed.
I mean, I couldn't help noticing that. Yeah, there is that kind of poetic connection, tiltul and tell, which is of
And
course not.
also tall tale in English, to tell a tall tale. I was
Why our imaginative capacities are growing by leaps and bounds.
Okay, I'm just gonna say also something. I'm jumping in. I have no more patience to wait. I just want to say, first of all, it's Baruch Hashem that you're back teaching. It's such a gift for all of us. And I'm blessed to be on this share with my mother and my mother-in-law. And we've been learning together with you for so many years. So I just really appreciate, and I'm grateful to Hashem for this. And whenever I get agitated, so my first reaction is, it's a bad feeling. I don't want to be agitated. I want to be calm. Bikesh Yaakov Lashevet b'shalva.
Yes.
But then I calm myself down and I say, no, something good will surely come of this agitation. It's forcing you to move forward, to do something big. So thank you so much. And one question, you quoted, after you quoted Emerson, you quoted another literary great, and I missed it, and I
think it was it Lawrence? D.H. Lawrence?
yeah, D.H.
Okay.
Lawrence.
Yes. One has to be so terribly religious to be an artist.
thank you.
100%.
Okay.
Wow.
Thank you very much, everybody, and it's been very good to
You had also
see the faces and the names. I can put faces to the names in my imagination.
excuse me, you also had quoted Henry James.
Henry James, right? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Keep going.
you.
Yeah. All the best. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.